Look at your hands. No, really, look at them. These hands have held on to things that were never meant for you. They've reached into the fire, trying to save a house that was already ash, trying to mend a heart that wasn't yours to fix. And now they're shaking. You feel like a vessel that has been dropped on a cold stone floor, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces of why and how could they. You are standing in the middle of a storm, screaming at the wind, asking why it chose to break you, when the wind is actually trying to blow away the veils that hid your true face. But listen to me. You are not the vase, you are the clay. The world sees the breaking as the end. They see the cracks and they call it damaged. They see the tears and they call it weakness. But the master potter, he sees the cracks and he calls it breathable. He sees the space where he can finally pour in the gold. You've been looking for your worth in the pockets of someone who didn't even know how to value themselves. You've been asking a blind person to describe the sunset of your soul. Stop. Just stop. The most confusing thing you can do to the darkness is to start shining. Not out of spite, not to prove them wrong, but because you've realized that your light was never theirs to manage. There is a divine rhythm to this pain. It is the labor of a new identity. You are being unmade so you can be truly made. The timing isn't late, it's perfect. The silence isn't empty, it's full of the answers you were too loud to hear. This moment, right here, this is where the old you dies and the eternal you breathes for the first time. You aren't losing them. You are finding the God who never left. You are rediscovering a hope that doesn't depend on a sorry that's never coming. Every tear you've cried is a drop of water on the parched soil of your spirit, preparing you for a harvest you cannot yet see. You thought the rejection was a funeral, but it was actually a planting. You are being hidden in the dark not to be buried, but to be grown. Your purpose is not a destination you reach. It is a fire you carry inside when the night is at its coldest. Trust the architect of your soul. Trust the silence between the heartbeats. You are more than your history. You are more than the words they used to define you. You are a living, breathing miracle of resilience and grace. Breathe. The wheel is still turning. And you are becoming a masterpiece. We often think the best way to handle a wound is to show the scar, to scream about the pain, or to demand an explanation from the person who held the blade. We've been told that closure comes from a conversation, but I want to suggest something different today. True power doesn't come from winning an argument, it comes from winning back your soul. When you are hurt, the most radical thing you can do, the thing that will truly confuse the ego of the one who hurt you, is to become a version of yourself they no longer recognize. I'm going to share with you a psychological and spiritual shift that doesn't just get him back or get her back, but gets you back. If you stay until the end, I will show you why your silence is actually the loudest message you will ever send, and how to use this moment of brokenness to build a life so beautiful it makes the past irrelevant. Most people expect you to chase. They expect you to explain. They expect you to stay trapped in the feedback loop of their drama. But when you apply the alchemy of reaction, you stop being a reactor and start being a creator. You realize that your energy is a currency, and you've been spending it on someone who is spiritually bankrupt. Confusion arises for them when you stop being an accessible source of energy for their dysfunction. By practicing strategic distancing, you aren't just moving away from them, you are moving toward yourself. You are creating a sanctuary where your intuition can finally be heard above the noise of the heartbreak. Finally, we must understand the purpose in the breaking. That pain you feel, it's the cracking of a shell that was keeping you small. You were trying to bloom in a pot that was too cramped for your roots. The universe had to break the pot so you could finally touch the earth. You are not a victim of an ending. You are the pioneer of a beginning. You are finally whole, not because someone stayed, but because you learned how to stay for yourself. The power of a non-reaction is perhaps the most misunderstood and underestimated tool in the human emotional arsenal. We live in a world that demands an immediate response for every action, a world that equates volume with strength and speed with certainty. When someone you love hurts you, your primal instinct, the ego's alarm, screams for you to strike back, to defend your territory, or to bleed out loud so they can see the damage they've caused. We think that by explaining our pain, we are being heard. We think that by shouting our worth, we are being valued. But in reality, when you react instantly to a wound, you are handing over the remote control of your internal state. You are telling that person that they have the power to dictate your mood, your peace, and your identity. A non-reaction, however, is the ultimate expression of emotional mastery. It is the moment you decide that your internal sanctuary is more important than their external provocation. It is the realization that not every dog that barks deserves an answer, and not every insult deserves a defense. This isn't about being quiet or passive. It is a loud, resonant statement of self-governance. It is the act of withdrawing your energy from a transaction that no longer serves your growth. When a man hurts you and expects the tears, the frantic phone calls, or the long paragraphs of explanation, and instead he meets a wall of calm, dignified presence, it creates a profound psychological shift. You have broken the script. You have refused to play the role of the victim in a play he is trying to direct. This silence acts as a mirror, forcing the other person to sit with their own actions without the distraction of your reaction. Most people use conflict to avoid looking at themselves. By staying centered, you remove that escape hatch. You are essentially saying, I am so secure in who I am that your attempt to diminish me hasn't even registered as a threat. This is where the confusion begins for them, but more importantly, where the clarity begins for you. In that space, you find the gap between the trigger and the response, where your freedom lives. You start to see that your energy is a divine currency, and you've been spending it on someone who is spiritually bankrupt. True mastery is the ability to observe an emotion without being consumed by it. It is the strength to feel the sting of betrayal but choose to sit in your own peace rather than running into their storm. This non-reaction is your fortress. It is the boundary that says your inner world is sacred and inaccessible to those who do not know how to honor it. You are not losing the argument. You are exiting the arena entirely because you've realized the prize was never worth the fight. By choosing not to react, you reclaim your time, your focus, and your dignity. You transform from someone who is being acted upon into the conscious creator of your own experience. This is not about winning a game of psychological chess. It is about realizing you don't even want to be at the table anymore. Your stillness is the bridge between the person you were, who needed their validation, and the person you are becoming, who only needs their own. It is the highest form of self-love to walk away from a fire without trying to put it out with your own blood. You are finally learning that your peace is a gift you give to yourself, and no one has the power to take it unless you hand it to them. Interrupting the toxic loop is the most profound psychological shift you can make when navigating the aftermath of being hurt, because it fundamentally changes the physics of the relationship. Every connection, especially those marked by conflict or imbalance, operates on a predictable circuit of action and reaction. When someone hurts you, they often do so with a subconscious expectation of how you will respond. They expect the tears, the frantic text messages, the defensive explanations, or the retaliatory anger. In their mind, they have already written the script for the next act of your drama, and they are waiting for you to walk onto the stage and deliver your lines. By providing that expected reaction, you are inadvertently closing the circuit, feeding the loop, and giving them exactly what they need to justify their own behavior. You become a predictable variable in their equation of control, but the moment you choose to respond with an unexpected, grounded calm, or better yet, a complete withdrawal of emotional currency, you shatter that circuit. You create a pattern interrupt that forces the other person to glitch. They are standing there with an electrical plug in their hand, looking for the socket of your insecurity, but you have moved the wall. This is where you reclaim the narrative of your life. You stop being a character in their story and start being the author of your own. When you refuse to feed the loop, the other person is left holding the weight of their own actions without the distraction of your defense. Usually, when we argue back, we give the other person a hook to hang their grievances on. They point at your anger to excuse their betrayal. They point at your craziness to excuse their coldness. But when there is no feedback, there is no hook. They are forced to look into the void of their own integrity. This is not about playing a game or using silence as a weapon. It's about a spiritual refusal to participate in a vibration that is lower than your purpose. Think of your energy as a high-frequency signal. When you engage in the back and forth of a toxic loop, you are tuning your radio to a station of static and noise. Breaking the loop means you have decided to change the frequency entirely. You are saying, I see the bait, but I am no longer a fish. This creates an incredible sense of internal power, because you realize that your peace is not a result of how they treat you, but a result of how you choose to respond to how they treat you. you begin to understand that you cannot control the wind, but you can absolutely control the set of your sails. By breaking the loop, you stop the bleeding of your emotional resources. You stop spending your precious mental energy rehearsing what you'll say next, or replaying what they said last. Instead, that energy flows back into you. It becomes the fuel for your healing, the spark for your creativity, and the foundation of your new boundaries. You are no longer waiting for them to change so that you can feel better. You are changing your response so that their behavior no longer has a home in your heart. This is the ultimate act of liberation. You are stepping out of the cage of he said, she said, and into the sunlight of I am. You are proving to yourself that you are not a puppet moved by the strings of someone else's dysfunction. You are a sovereign being, and your response is your throne. When the loop is broken, the cycle of pain ends with you, and the cycle of power begins within you, shifting from a desperate search for an external why to a grounded state of internal validation is the moment you reclaim your soul from the hands of the person who hurt you. When someone causes us pain, our natural human instinct is to turn into a detective. We spend hours, days, and even months analyzing their last text, their social media, or their childhood trauma, trying to solve the mystery of their betrayal. We tell ourselves that if we can just understand why they lied or why they couldn't choose us, we will finally have the key to our closure. But this is a spiritual trap. By making your healing dependent on an explanation from them, you are giving the person who least values you the power to define your reality. You are essentially saying, I cannot feel whole again until the person who broke me gives me permission to be. Internal validation is the radical act of taking that power back. It is the realization that their behavior is a map of their internal world, not a reflection of your worth. A person who is at peace with themselves does not seek to destroy the peace of others. Therefore, their cruelty or indifference is simply a confession of their own internal chaos. When you stop asking why did they do this and start declaring I know who I am, you shift from a state of victimhood to a state of sovereignty. You begin to realize that the closure you've been chasing isn't something someone gives you, it is something you grow from within. This shift creates a profound, unshakable peace because it removes the need for the other person to understand your pain or admit their fault. You no longer need them to agree with your version of the truth, to live in your truth. You become your own primary source of certainty. Think about the incredible amount of energy we waste trying to convince someone that we are enough. Every minute spent trying to prove your value to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you is a minute stolen from your own purpose. When you anchor yourself internally, you build a foundation that doesn't crack when the storm of a relationship hits. You start to speak to yourself with the kindness and loyalty you once gave away so freely to them. You celebrate your own resilience, your own capacity to love, and your own journey toward light. This internal fortress means that when someone walks away, it might sting your heart, but it cannot touch your identity. You are no longer a house built on the shifting sands of someone's opinion. You are a cathedral built on the rock of your own self-knowing. This transformation is what truly confuses those who have hurt you. They expect you to be shattered because they thought they were your foundation. When they see you standing tall, not out of bitterness, but out of a deep, quiet realization of your own divinity, they realize they never held the keys to your kingdom. You have graduated from the need for their apology, and in doing so, you have found a joy that is independent of their presence. You are finally home within yourself, and that is the only place you ever needed to be. You have realized that the answer wasn't in their words, but in your own heartbeat. You are enough, simply because you exist. Strategic distancing is not merely a physical act of moving away. It is a sophisticated spiritual redirection of your most precious resource, your attention. When a person hurts you, they often expect to remain the sun around which your world orbits, even if that orbit is now defined by pain, tears, or confrontation. They expect to stay relevant. They expect to be the ghost in your late-night thoughts and the primary topic of your conversations with friends. By implementing strategic distancing, you are effectively removing the oxygen from the fire of their ego. Confusion arises for them, not because you are playing a game of hard to get, but because you have become impossible to find on the emotional frequency they are used to operating within. You have stopped being an accessible source of energy for their drama, their guilt, or their validation. When you create this distance, you are setting a boundary that says your inner sanctuary is no longer open for public viewing or unauthorized entry. You are no longer providing the supply of your reaction, which forces them to stand alone in the silence of their own choices. Without your voice to argue against, they are forced to listen to the echo of their own actions. Without your presence to blame for their discomfort, they are forced to face the reflection in their own mirror. This is where the power dynamic shifts entirely. You are no longer waiting for them to step back so you can breathe. You have stepped back so far that their influence can no longer reach your lungs. This distance is a sanctuary where you begin to detox from the addiction of the relationship. It is the space where the fog begins to lift and you start to see the situation for what it truly was rather than what you hoped it would be. Many people fear that by distancing themselves, they are losing or giving up, but in reality, you are gaining the perspective required for true healing. You are moving from the front lines of the battlefield to the high ground of the observer. From this vantage point, you realize that much of the pain was maintained by your own proximity to the source of it. Strategic distancing is the quiet, dignified withdrawal of your spirit from a space where it was not celebrated. It is the realization that you do not need to explain your departure to someone who didn't value your presence. As you grow more distant, you become more present to yourself. You start to hear your own intuition again, that quiet whisper that was drowned out by the noise of their demands or the chaos of the heartbreak. You begin to invest that reclaimed energy into your own health, your own career, and your own peace. The confusion they feel is simply the shock of losing access to a soul they took for granted. But your goal is no longer to confuse them. Your goal is to clarify yourself. You are building a life that is so full, so vibrant, and so aligned with your higher purpose that the space they once occupied is now filled with the light of your own self-discovery. This distance is the beginning of your freedom. You are not running away, you are walking toward a version of yourself that is no longer defined by who stayed or who left. You are finally giving yourself the room to grow into the person you were always meant to be. Gemini said, "The concept of post-traumatic growth is the final, most courageous realization you will ever have, because it transforms your deepest wound into your greatest wisdom. When someone you love hurts you, it feels like a structural failure of your life, as if the foundation you built has crumbled and the roof of your future has caved in. You find yourself standing in the ruins, wondering how something that felt so solid could turn to dust so quickly. But if we shift our perspective from the horizontal view of human ego to the vertical view of spiritual evolution, we begin to see that this shattering is often the only way the light of your true purpose can finally get in. We spend so much of our lives building carapaces of comfort, relationships that are good enough, habits that are safe enough, and versions of ourselves that are small enough to not upset anyone. We become prisoners of our own safety. Heartbreak, as agonizing as it is, acts as a divine wrecking ball. It destroys the structures that were actually cages. It forces you out of the cramped rooms of compromise and into the vast open landscape of your own potential. This is the ultimate confusion of the soul. The ego is terrified because it sees an ending, but the spirit is rejoicing because it sees an opening. You start to realize that the break wasn't a punishment from the universe, but a promotion into a deeper level of consciousness. It is the friction required to wake you up from a dream that was actually a nightmare. If they hadn't hurt you, you might have stayed in that lukewarm water until your soul eventually went numb. The pain was the alarm clock. It was the signal that you had outgrown that version of your life. This is where you begin to see the master potter's hands at work. You thought you were being destroyed, but you were actually being refined. Every jagged edge of your grief is being smoothed by the realization that you are stronger than the things that tried to break you. You are discovering a resilience that didn't exist when things were easy. You are discovering a voice that only found its strength when it had to scream no more. This purpose in the pain is the alchemy of your history. You are taking the shrapnel of the betrayal and forging it into a shield of wisdom. You begin to understand that the person who hurt you was merely a messenger, a painful one, yes, sent to tell you that you were settling for a fraction of the love you deserve. They were the catalyst that forced you to finally look at your own reflection and fall in love with the person looking back. This is the ultimate confusion for the one who walked away. They expected to leave you in the dark, but they inadvertently pushed you into the dawn. They expected to see you diminished, but instead they see you expanded, vibrant, and aligned with a mission that has nothing to do with them. You are no longer defined by the wound. You are defined by the way you healed. You are moving from a story of what happened to me to a story of what grew through me. This is the sacred harvest of your heartbreak. You are planting the seeds of your future in the very soil that felt like a grave. You are finally realizing that the life you were trying to save was actually standing in the way of the life that was trying to save you. Trust the process of the unmaking. You are not a victim of an ending. You are the pioneer of a beginning.